Hello and welcome to Bloke on the Range. This is episode 2 in our Swiss straight pull rifle series. So today we're going to start at the start, the 1889. In fact, we're going to start before the start because we really need to know where we were before we can fully understand where this rifle is coming from. Now, in 1868, the Swiss designed the first Vetterli rifle, a rather large, long, heavy 12-shot tube loader, an extremely early repeater to be adopted by a military. Shot a rather dumpy little cartridge, giving a 300-grain bullet about 1,400 feet per second, which is pretty rainbow-like. But they were there. Yeah, it's weak compared to a 4.55 Martini Henry or a 45-70, but hey, you've got 12 of them, and that counts for something. So as time went on through the 1870s, most European militaries adopted some form of bolt action or falling block single shot, later moving on to repeaters, like the Germans, for instance, had the 1871 Mauser single shot, which they then upgraded to the 71/84 by giving it a tube magazine. Everyone was pretty content with that, and then suddenly, what's this? Bother, the French.
Mais oui, bien sûr, c'est nous, les Français. What did you think? Yes, in 1886 we adopted the Lebel rifle, a smokeless, jacketed bullet repeating rifle, the first in the world. And what is that I hear? All of the armies of the rest of Europe collectively cacking their pants. But really, they should be thanking us.
Thank you.
You're welcome, santé!
Anyway, thanks to my French cousin Jean-Claude Mec for that little interruption there. Yes, the French had really hit the brown note with the Lebel, and that sent everyone running to the bathroom to clean themselves up. And clean themselves up quickly they did. By 1888, the Germans had the Commission rifle, which was a 5-shot rimless, smokeless rifle with a Mannlicher type clip, and the Swiss, by 1889, had settled on this. I mean, we're talking really serious catch-up here. And it was really a double-edged sword with the French. They thought that they were getting one up on everybody by being first to introduce smokeless. But as soon as everyone saw how it worked, and with spies and leaks and what have you, reverse engineering the chemistry of the powder was not actually a big deal. Now, as part of the trials on this rifle, the Swiss played with compressed pellets of black powder, which is unsurprising because it was Colonel Schmidt-Rubin who was involved, hence the Rubin of the collector name for the rifles. Now, he was also involved with the development of 303 British, and as we all know, the British adopted a single pellet of compressed black powder as a stopgap while the Brits were working on their smokeless propellant, which is cordite. The Swiss also played around with pick rates, which didn't work. They absorbed moisture and were too brisant. What's the English term for that? I think it's even brisant. Anyway, yes, too much shock in them, and actually they discovered that the compressed pellets of black powder, they produced too much pressure and far too much smoke compared to the Vetterli, so it obscures the target too much for the shooters. Now, it's an interesting point, is that people generally think that black powder is lower pressure than smokeless, and yes, black powder in grains, yes, it is lower pressure than smokeless, typically, provided you're not doing anything silly like stacking a case full of bullseye or something. But a compressed pellet of black powder gives higher pressures than the proper load of smokeless propellant, and actually the 303 British black powder round had a significantly higher working pressure than the early cordite rounds. So anyway, this rifle was developed by a Colonel Schmidt, who was allowed by the military department to patent it, and in fact he patented 3 aspects: the action, the magazine cutoff, and the Charger. And we'll get onto all of that in good time. Now, before I bring the camera around, a quick terminological note. These are often referred to as Schmidt-Rubins, Schmidt being the designer of the rifle, Rubin the designer of the ammunition. This isn't the official designation, this is a collector designation, but we all use it universally because everybody uses it. The official name for it is the Eidgenössisches Repetiergewehr 1889, the Federal Repeating Rifle 1889. So these rifles were produced from 1891 until a certain date in 1897, when from then on an improved, strengthened version, the 89/96, which we'll get onto in a couple of episodes, replaced them. And when I say replaced, I don't mean that the rifles were withdrawn for it. It was just after a certain date, no more of these were made. In total, about 212,000 army ones were made, a certain number of private ones. I have no figures on that. And it's also commonly misunderstood that they were all issued out. A large proportion were held back and were held in cantonal stores. And once we get onto the story of the changeover to the GP11 cartridge, you'll see that there were tons of the things on hand so that they could withdraw rifles, issue rifles. There were basically massive numbers on hand. Now, another thing that's often not well understood with the Swiss designations is a bit like the Russian ones. It's typically the design date. Now, because everyone was rushing around like mad bastards after the Lebel, this one was officially adopted in 1889, so the same year it was designed. The cartridge, on the other hand, the cartridge is the GP90, because this was only, the adoption was only decided on later than that. Now, it's often the case that the design date, the adoption date, and the date going into service can be quite spread out. But here, we're 1889 for the design, 1889 for the adoption decision. The first tranche of production was about 25,000 rifles produced in 1891, so they were probably in the hands of the first troops from 1891 onwards. So the first rifles went to the infantry of the Auszug and the Landwehr. And if you haven't come across this terminology, I suggest you go back and watch the earlier episode in this series. But just to keep it brief, the Auszug are the youngest troops, the Landwehr are the middle ones, and the Landsturm are the old codgers. So anyway, yes, the infantry of the Auszug and the Landsturm, and then for the Auszug only, the cavalry, the engineers, and the logistics troops, the baggage train as it was when everything was horse-drawn. From that starting point, no more Vetterlis would be issued into the system. They start bubbling up, and in fact the Vetterlis freed up from the Auszug and the infantry Landsturm, the infantry Landwehr, could then go straight into the Landsturm, so that basically everybody in the Swiss military in all three layers was armed with a repeating rifle, even if there were two types of ammunition and two families of rifles. Now, this was officially adopted for the cavalry, but that was just a completely stupid idea. It was a real WTF moment, and of course it didn't happen. Who's going to cut around on horseback with this kind of thing in a saddle bucket or on their back? No, absolutely ridiculous. So these started being issued to the troops in about 1891, 1892, that sort of time frame, and from there they bubbled up through the system. It gets rather complicated with the introduction of the 1911 rifle, and there's a lot of chopping and changing and issuing and unissuing and reissuing, and we'll deal with that in detail later. They seem to have started going home with soldiers leaving service. The earliest date I've seen on one so far is 1912. If anyone's got an earlier one, I'd like to see it. Please send me a photo of the markings. That'd be superb. Yeah, most of the privatisation numbers you see tend to be sort of from the 1920s onwards. These ended up during the GP11 era in the hands primarily of the Landsturm as they bubbled up to the top, to the point where until 1934, as you left the Landwehr, you had your 1911 taken off you and replaced with one of these. Now, with the introduction of the K31, they decided in 1934 that they'd withdraw these from the Landsturm, so the entire army was on the same ammunition. Now, they all then went into store and were issued to the Ortswehr, which is the local defence volunteers, during the Second World War. Sort of last gasp of them, I've got some photos of them being used in target competition as late as the 50s. They might still have been used in the 60s, but they were pretty outclassed by the 1911 series, and ammunition doesn't seem to be produced beyond 1912 with the GP11 or 1924 for the later ammunition. And when I've got the camera around, we'll take a quick look at them. The remaining rifles were sold off after the Second World War for all of 5 francs each, and a lot of them finished their lives converted to 22 rimfire target rifles, often made up to resemble a K11, a G11 or a K31, but on this action as a single shot small bore rifle, which is nice. Right, sorry to cut you off there, but I'm in my editing suite, which is my dining room table, editing this video, and I'm suddenly realizing quite how much footage I've got. And most of you won't have the stamina, and I don't blame you, to get through the whole lot in one episode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it here. So this episode is going to be history and adoption, and the next episode is going to be the mechanics. So those of you that are on tenterhooks to see the old girl up close, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait, or if you're not watching this immediately after launch, you can just click through and I'll put a link up in the corner, whichever corner it is. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and please consider supporting us on Patreon. All help gratefully received. It allows us to spend more time and do more interesting videos than we could otherwise. And hang around after the end card for a special message. Bye.
Rebonjour, mes petits choux-fleurs. It is I, Jean-Claude. Now, the blog has been receiving very many nasty complaints about grotesque, ugly, and outdated cultural stereotypes being used in his videos, and it behooves me, as a professional French cousin, to respond to these. Now, yes, it is indeed true that the blog is grotesque, and he is indeed very ugly. And yes, he is an appallingly outdated cultural stereotype of an Englishman. But do not worry, he cannot help it. He was just born that way. Thank you for your attention. Allez, salut maintenant.